Okay, we're going to go over the notes for rational exponents. So the top is mostly a review of radicals. So we are going to look at the first row. You see that 2 squared is 2 times 2, which is equal to 4. So the square root of 4 is 2. Now 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. So what would the square root of 9 be? Well, that would be just 3. 4 squared is 4 times 4, which is 16. So the square root of 16 would just be 4. 5 squared is 5 times 5, which is 25. So the square root of 25 is just going to be 5. Now, if you look at the next row, we are now taken to the power of 3. Now, 2 to the third is 2 times 2 times 2, and that's 8. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this. Maybe a lot of you are, maybe some of you are not. But this here is called the cube root. And when you see the cube root, just think about what the square root means first. The square root means, when you're taking the square root of 4, is what number multiplied by itself 2 times is equal to 4. That's 2. If you look at the square root of 9, what number multiplied by itself twice is 9? Well, that's 3. Square root of 16, what number multiplied by itself twice is 16? That's 4. So we're going to take that same idea and apply it to the cube root. When you see cube root of 8, it's asking you what number, if you multiply it by itself 3 times, will equal 8. Well, that answer is 2, because that's the opposite of 2 cubed. 3 cubed is 3 times 3 times 3, that's 27. So if I'm taking the cube root of 27, that's what number multiplied by itself 3 times is 27. Well, that's 3, because 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. 4 to the third is 4 times 4 is 64. So the cube root of 64 is what number multiplied by itself 3 times is 64. Well, we just figured that out. That's 4. 5 to the third power is 125. 5 times 5 times 5. So if they're asking you what is the cube root of 125, that's what number multiplied by itself 3 times is 125. That's 5. So the next bottom row is the same thing. 2 to the fourth is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16. Now, even though you probably know what all of the answers here are going to be already, think about what's happening here, because you need to understand it for later in the lecture. So here, I have the fourth root of 16. So you're asking yourself, so what number multiplied by itself 4 times is 16? Well, that's 2, because 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16. So 3 to the fourth power is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, that's 81. So the fourth root of 81, it's asking what number multiplied by itself 4 times is 81. That's 3. If 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 is 256, then the fourth root of 256 is 4. And then the fourth root of 625, if 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 is 625, then the fourth root of 625 would just be 5. Now, we're going to go on and take this idea and move it a little further. Now, what we have dealt with is mostly stuff like this, right? 5, oops. We've dealt mostly with 2 to the third, 3 squared, 4 to the fifth, things like that, where our exponent was always an integer, okay? And in the last lesson, we also talked about stuff like what this means, right? Remember that this is 1 over 25, right? Because it's 1 over 5 squared. Well, now we're going to talk about a new type of exponent, and that's when you have a fraction. Now, let's look at the first row here. So you see that I have 4 to the 1/2. Now, look at what it says here. Exponents can be fractions as well. The denominator always represents the root of the base. And what were we talking about with roots? Well, the root of the base is what we were talking about here. This is the square root. This is the cube, this is a square. The first row is square root, the second row is cube root, and the third row is fourth root. You can keep going, fifth root, sixth root, seventh root, eighth root, and so on and so on. But the denominator tells you what type of root you have. So if you have the square root, if you have 4 to the 1/2, the denominator controls the root, right? So that 2 indicates it's going to be a square root. And so my answer is going to be square root of 4 is 2. So if I have 9 to the 1/2, this is going to be the square root of 9. And that is going to be 3. So 9 to the 1/2 power is really just 3. Okay? So go ahead and try to do the 16 to the 1/2 and 25 to the 1/2. I'll give you a second. You could pause the video and do those on your own. So this is the square root of 16, which is equal to 4. And this is the square root of 25. That's equal to 5. Okay, now let's look at the next row. I have to the 1/3 power. So this time, my denominator is 3. So that means instead of the square root, I'm going to be taking the cube root. And the cube root is when you have the 3 out here in front. So 8 to the 1/3 is the cube root of 8, which is 2. 27 to the 1/3 okay, looks like that. Okay. I'm just kind of looking for a symbol here if they have it. Okay, it looks like they don't. But that's how it would look like with a 3 outside. 64 to the 1, oh, and this is equivalent to 3. 64 to the 1/3 is the cube root of 64. And remember, just look back at the top. We already did the cube root of 64. That's equal to 4. And then 125 to the 1/3 so it's the cube root of 125. And we already know from up here, what number multiplied by itself 3 times is 125? That's 5. 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. So the cube root of 125 is 5. And then now we could keep going on. If I have 1/4, and the 4 this time is my denominator, right? Now I'm talking about the 4th root. So what number multiplied by itself 4 times is 16? That's 2. So if I have 81 to the 1/4, it's really, the 4 goes here. And so now I rewrite it as a radical like that. And so what is the 4th root of 81? What number multiplied by itself 4 times is 81? Well, we already did that up here, right? And that's 3. 256 to the 1/4. I rewrite it at the 4 here. 256. And then that would be equal to 4. And then 625 to the 1/4. That would be the 4th root of 625. And so you're asking yourself, what number multiplied by itself 4 times is 625? Well, that's 5. And if you always need something to refer to, you could go back and look at the top table where we found out what the 4th root of 625 was, right? Okay. Now, all of these problems here had a 1 as the numerator. But you could have other fractions where 1 is not always the numerator. So if you have this, what you are going to do is we're going to show you that if you have a fraction as an exponent, the top is always the power, the bottom is always the root. Okay? So when you write it in radical form, the power is here, and then the root goes there. Okay, so we're going to practice converting between these two forms. So the instructions say to change the following from rational exponents to radical form. Okay, so remember, the numerator, you have to take this into account. The numerator is the power, the denominator is the root, and you're going to rewrite it like that. So if I have x to the 2/3, the numerator is 2, that's the power, 3 is the denominator, that's the root. So this is just going to be rewritten. The 3 goes as the root. There we go, it's x squared. They tend to ask this type of question in the SAT, okay? Converting from fraction to radical form. So please, next year when you take the SAT again, make sure to study this topic before you take it. X to the 3/2. So once again, my power is 3. Now here's the kind of thing about square roots. If you have a 2 in the denominator, right here, we never write the 2 here for square root, right? You look at the very beginning, right? See how we wrote, and look at my cursor, how it's the power of 3, and we write the 3 here. Whenever it's the power of 2, we assume it's a square root. So when we don't write a number there, that's always the square root. So going back to here, if I have x to the 3/2, the 3 is the power, the 2 is the root, but we never write 2 here for square root. So this is the proper answer. Okay? And on a test, they will never write the 2 here. So you're like, can I write the 2? Technically, yes, but you'll never ever see it like that in math. Okay. The next question, p to the 3/4. So the 4 goes here. P to the 4/3. The 3 goes here this time. And the 4 goes here. So please note the difference. Okay. Number 5, m to the 2/5. So once again, the 5 is going to go here. and this is going to be m squared. And then number 6, m to the 5 halves. So remember that the 5 will be the power, and because the denominator is a 2, it's a square root. So I just leave it blank, and we all assume it's a square root. Okay? So what I want you to do now is please pause the video and try 7 through 10 on your own first, then unpause it so you can see what the answers are. So number 7, so it's the 5th root of x to the 3rd. Number 8, once again, it's to the 7th power, but it's a square root. So once again, we're not going to put the 2 there, but that's how you write it. Y to the 6/5. 5 is the root. 6 is the power. And then number 10, we're going to rewrite it. 10 is the root. And the power is 1. And remember, for the power of 1, you never really have to write the power of 1. So that is the correct answer there. But it's okay if you write a 1 there. There's no problem. Now we're going to go backwards. So for number 11, it's in radical form. And so we need to change it to where the exponent's a fraction. So remember, the power is on top, and then the root is the denominator. So it's x to the 3/5. Number 12, the power is on top, and the root is there. And because there's no number there, a lot of people will get confused and they will put a 1 there as the denominator. It is not a 1. When you don't see a number with a radical, that's the square root. It's always going to be 2. Please do not get that wrong. Now number 13, y. It doesn't have a power, so the power is 1, and then the root is 7. And number 14, once again, if there's no number with the root, it's a square root, so it's 9, m to the 9 halves. So once again, pause the video, and I want you to do 15 through 18 on your own, please. Okay, so 15 should be x to the 5/4. 16 should be y to the 11/2. 17 should be y to the 1/8. And then 18 should be m to the 15/2. Okay, the last topic, or I mean, it's still the same topic, but now we are actually going to evaluate when we actually have numbers there instead of just variables. So let's look at number 19. And I have this in radical form. And there's not supposed to be an equal sign there. So if I have the square root of 16 to the 3, so what does this mean? This means the power of 3 but it also means the square root, right? Okay. And do you see that? The 3 is a power, but then you have the square root with no number there. So that's a square root. And then so what it tells you to do is you see the 16. You have to do 2 things to the 16. You have to take the power of 3 and you have to do the square root. Now, whenever you see problems like this, it is always easier, and please, it is always do this first. It's easier to do the root first. You can do the power first, but think about this. Look at number 19. You can do 16 times 16 times 16, right? Find what that answer is and then take the square root of that. But that just seems more complicated. What is easier to do first is always look at the root. So you see the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to take the square root. So what is the square root of 16? That's 4. So this is going to become 4 to the third. Okay. Does everyone see what we did there? We saw that it's a square root of 16. So I know that's 4. And then now I'm going to do the power. So these problems are always a two-step thing. You always have to take the root and you always have to take the power. It's always easier to take the root first. So the square root of 16 is 4. 4 to the third is 4 times 4 times 4. And so my answer here is 64. Now let's look at 20. So once again, it tells you that there is going to be a cube root and then power of 2, right? So once again, it's always easier to do the root first. So you have to think to yourself, what is the cube root of 27? And remember, think about that in your head. What number multiplied by itself 3 times is 27? Well, if you are, a lot of you probably know what it is, but if you're having trouble, look back up here. The cube root of 27 is 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this cube root of 27 with 3. We're going to keep the power there. And so my answer here is 9. Okay, 625 to the 3/4 power. So once again, there are two things they are asking you to do here. It's a power of 3. And it's also the 4th root. And like I said, which one is easier to do, the power first or the root first? You should do the root first. So what is, and remember, if you don't like it being written as fractions, you could rewrite it to look like that. Okay, so now it looks like 19 and 20. And like I said, it's always easier to do the root first. So think to yourself, what is the 4th root of 625? What number multiplied by itself 4 times is 625? This one should be easy because it ends in a 5. So even if you're having trouble, look back up here. We figured it out right here on the bottom right of the first table and the second table. The 4th root of 625 is 5. And so this is just 5 to the third. And my answer is 125. Okay. Now 22, if you want to rewrite it, remember it's like that. The 2 on the bottom means it's the square root. And so always take the root first. What is the square root of 49? Well, that's 7. 7 times 7 is 49. So this is just 7 to the third power. And then 49 times 7, I think is 343. Yeah, it's 343. Okay. So what I want you to do, try the next 4 on your own. Pause the video. They're almost exactly like the ones on the top. Try them out on your own. And then unpause it and check your answers. So 23, remember that here they're asking you to take the square root of 4 and take it to the 5th power. So what's the square root of 4? Think about that in your head. Well, that's just 2. And so this is 2 to the 5th power. And 2 to the 5th power is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. That's 32. The next problem is the square root of 36 to the 3rd. The square root of 36, remember, always do the root first. The square root of 36 is 6. And then 6 to the 3rd power is 6 times 6 times 6. And so this should be 216. (64 to the 2/3 power). Remember, if you do not like it in fraction form, you could change it this. And then so now you just ask yourself, you take the cube root of 64 first. So what's the cube root of 64? What number multiplied by itself 3 times is 64? That's 4. And then I square it. So my answer is 16. And then the last question, if I want to rewrite it, by the way, you don't have to rewrite it. Sometimes it's just easier for people to think about it in radical form. So think to yourself, what is the 4th root of 16? What number multiplied by itself 4 times is 16? Oh, that's just 2. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16. And then so 2 to the 3rd power is 8. Okay, so once again, please email me if you have any questions.